Hello, and welcome to the Tower Coffee Hour. This is your host, Preston or Ty Tyree, and today we're talking about a special event in Miller. Two friends, old-time friends, from Delft in the Netherlands were in the United States and just happened to be able to make their schedule work to get by Austin to talk about their new book. This is the third one they've written, and this one is about women who've changed transportation and livability in cities all over the world. This event was hosted by the Miller Residential Group, two of our friends who have a real estate office here in the neighborhood, and they let us use their office, and wow, it really looks nice. So check in with them, the Miller Residential Group.
Okay, we're going to start. We're so glad everybody's here. We put this together really quickly. The Brumletts reached out very kindly and said, hey, we're going to be in the United States. They live in the Netherlands. And we could add Austin to a trip that we already have planned. And so we threw this together. So I'm sorry that it's kind of standing room only. We had no idea how many people would show up.
There are two seats up front if anyone wants one.
There are multiple seats up here if somebody wants to come up. Yeah, come on. Please.
I'm not shy.
We won't bite.
First row seat. Oh my gosh, this is perfect. So I think everybody knows that there's lots of food. Please help yourself. In the kitchen, there is regular coffee, decaf, and hot chocolate, and sparkling water. So please help yourself. Okay, so I'm Hayden Blackwalker. Clearly we don't have a microphone, so we're going to have to project a little bit. Let me know if you can't hear me or anybody else. I am chair of the board for Safe Streets Austin, which is a local nonprofit. We have lots of our board members here. Tom Wald, Kathy Sokolik, Robert Foster are all here. Did I miss anybody?
KT.
Well, and then we have new board members coming on board, which are also here, including Isabel Webb-Carey and Deb Kelstead, and can't remember who else. So very excited, and you guys are from out of town, so you may not know, but this room is incredible. The people that are here are incredible city staff, people who run nonprofits all across the city, our nonprofit partners for a lot of things. I don't even know how, this is, Veronica's the chair of the Austin Transportation Partnership. I mean, there's incredible knowledge in this room, so I'm really happy to see everybody and so many friends. So I want to formally thank the partners that helped pull us together really quickly. Urban Austin Reads, I saw Cutter come in. Hi, Cutter. They worked really hard to get books here, and it didn't work out with the publisher, but they have QR codes all over the walls where you can order the book, and the little gay shop will get you the books if you order that way. Reconnect Austin, who provided some of the funding for this event. The Austin History Center, Adam Powell, the executive director. It's the Austin History Center Association. They work in partnership with the city-run Austin History Center, and if you haven't been down to see the new renovated and now open Falk Library, it's
Safe Streets, Urban ATX Reads folks are invited for a tour. Would love to have y'all check out the cities.
So I want to give a really big shout out and thank you to Kathy Sokolik. I don't even know where Kathy is at the moment. Way in the back. Kathy's office, along with her husband Mike and Ashley Jackson. So we're really grateful. They helped us out at the last minute, kind of give us a space here. So thank you very much.
Anybody needs to buy or sell a house, call us.
Yeah. They helped us buy our house. They're amazing. Robert Foster got e-bikes for you guys and helped ride up here with y'all earlier today. So Robert's also on the Safe Streets Austin board. Adam Greenfield is the interim executive director, way back there in the back. Adam has been working really hard to put this together, and I want to mention that he's also working really hard on an event February 12th. You can put it on your calendars in the evening. Jeff Speck will be in Austin, and we'll be doing a community event. So if we have a little bit more time to organize, we'll try to get a bigger space where people can actually sit down. But yeah, that event should be free, and we'd love everybody to come. A save the date will go out on Tuesday, and then once we get the location locked down, the venue, we'll send out more information for everybody. Okay, we are honored to have one of the busiest people in Austin.
I'm working to slow down.
Slow down. Our District 2 Council Representative, Vanessa Fuentes, is here with us today. We're really
I was just reminded, talking with Chris earlier, of the urban mobility study tour trip that I did to the Netherlands. That was just an incredible experience for me to see what is possible and when you design your city in a way that is bike and pedestrian friendly. So great memories there. I think we would love to do that again, perhaps engage.
Most welcome. Yeah.
Some of my other colleagues. But no, just want to thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to learn more about this book. I think we all know the legacy that we have here in Austin, where oftentimes in the decision-making rooms and the elected positions, there weren't a lot of women represented, right? And we see that shows up. I mean, that shows up in the Austin that we experience today. You know, whether it's not having enough street lighting in neighborhoods for someone who's getting off, getting out of the bus on a late night shift, right? Or not having enough lactation rooms in public buildings, or just wanting to ensure that we're more inclusive in how we build and design our city. So having this opportunity to learn more about, well, one, acknowledging where we're at as a city, but two, also we are making progress because we do have some incredible leaders that are, one, elected today. I work with incredible women policymakers. Our chair of the Planning Commission, Alice Woods, my commissioner, also a woman. Head of ATP, Veronica, here, which, by the way, can we give a huge shout out for the milestone? So we're making progress, but I think it's, as like anything else, it's important to acknowledge, acknowledge the effort, but also recognize that it matters who you have in decision-making seats. We want people who are asking the right questions, who are asking who's at the table, who's not here, whose perspective needs to be considered, and how do we really demand a better city for everyone. And that's what brings us all together today, and I'm excited to hear more from Chris and Melissa about your book.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a few more things to say, but you guys know how cool these people are, so I think I need to remind you, and I'll just let you. You came to hear them, so I'm going to sit down and let you. Thank you, Hayden.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. Yeah, thanks Hayden and Safe Streets Austin for pulling all this together. This was, I often joke when we're talking to people, Chris has a really hard time saying no, and this was one of those instances. I'm glad he didn't, but we knew we were going to be in Miami. We have to go up to Indiana on Monday for an event that was postponed for me back in October, and Chris was like, well, why don't we go to Austin for the weekend? I'm like, well, we could relax. That could be a thing. But I'm glad that we were able to come. Austin's long been on my list of places to visit, and had never had the chance, so I'm glad to be here and to be able to share our latest project with you all. So yeah, women, y'all. I'm gonna go home and everyone's gonna be like, what happened? Anyway, but yeah, for us, women changing cities, it really is this like snapshot in time of these global stories of transformation from around the world. That we'll explain throughout the presentation how we got to selecting the cities and what the reasoning was. But it was a book that we weren't going to write. We had said we weren't going to write another book. We were done after Curbing Traffic. It's a lot of work for those who may have written. It just takes a lot of time. But as I've shared with people, we had we had a bit of an argument and said, no, that's it. And then while Chris was traveling, we got an email from Reba Publishing saying, hey, if you all are ever interested in putting together a picture book, showcasing all the work that you guys do, let us know. And as soon as I read the email, I'm like, we're writing another book. But we're really happy, we're really proud of it, and we're really happy to be able to share it with you today. So for those who maybe don't know who we are in the room, we are former Vancouverites, grew up in Ontario in the suburbs, swiftly moved to a more urban context and really enjoyed living in Vancouver as they were investing in cycling, and found ourselves as accidental international sustainable mobility experts over the years through this storytelling and writing with the first book, with Building the Cycling City, and then building on from there. But now we are firmly planted in the Netherlands. We are Dutch now, so yay. And what we love to do is be able to travel around and share what we get to see and learn from not just the Netherlands, but all the wonderful places we get to visit.
So we start with a question. Why on earth did a couple of people who live and work in the Netherlands and have written 2 fairly successful books about the Dutch context, why write a book about global transformation fronted by women? Why focus exclusively on women? And we try not to pay too much attention to the comment section on our social media channels, but there have been a few people saying, well, why not write about men changing cities or everyone changing cities? And we make a point of not actually responding to those questions, but to you all, we'll give an answer. And the very simple answer is, despite the fact that women make up half of the population, they're vastly underrepresented in, particularly in urban transport planning and particularly in positions of leadership and decision making. So these are some of the numbers that we dug out in our research. This idea that we fixed the gender gap is nonsense. We do from time to time get told, well, we fixed this problem. Women are graduating at the same rates as men from prominent universities and schools, and that is true. That is certainly true, but those women are not filtering up into positions of leadership and decision making at the same rates that men are. It's called the leaky pipeline syndrome. There's various cultural, societal, structural reasons why that isn't happening. But that was part of the reason why we wanted to shine a spotlight on the women that are getting stuff done. But the statistic we highlight in the book and tend to focus on, and again, this is a snapshot in time, but at the time of writing, 300 largest cities in the world, only 25 had female mayors. So we are, as we keep saying, a long way from actually addressing this problem.
So, to help you understand how we came to the cities that we chose to profile, there are 11 case studies in the book. I want you all to come back with us to the time when everything changed. Just be prepared, it's a little bit, harsh to go back, but COVID-19 was really this snapshot in time when suddenly all of the work that probably all of you have been doing, that we had been doing around trying to tell people we need more space for staying, more safe space for cycling and walking, suddenly became a reality in so many cities because we needed that physically distanced environment in order to enjoy our cities, in order to not be trapped in our homes all of the time. And while we were not necessarily trapped in our homes, but working from our kitchen table in Delft, we started to see all these shining lights of examples of cities that were really forging ahead and really finding a new way to experience their cities in a way that many of us had been advocating for and might have thought was hopeless. But it really helped to for us feel inspired even sitting behind our computer screens at home.
So one of the first examples that we observed, and perhaps surprising in the North American context at least, was Montreal in Quebec, Canada. Under the leadership there of Mayor Valérie Plante, that very first summer of the COVID-19 pandemic, they worked with the business community to permanently pedestrianize 11 commercial arterials. When I say permanent, I mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from May to September. So there's 9 kilometers of car-free streets, reimagining these spaces, again, as places to pass time rather than to pass through, building terraces, working with local artists to create art installations, And really, I think leveraging COVID-19 as this low risk, high reward opportunity to experiment, to reallocate space, and to create these corridors that weren't just for traffic stewards for moving cars, but for the community to gather, spend time, and ultimately for the businesses to spend money.
On our side of the Atlantic, a story that maybe most of you all have heard a number of times, but we were seeing Paris change dramatically. We traveled there for the first time in 2001 on a holiday. Paris has long been the city I dreamed of visiting growing up in suburban Ontario. But what we were seeing was it become this place really dominated by cars, you know, with lots of walking on the sidewalks, but very high volume, very high noise and stress, to suddenly transforming into these beautiful pedestrianized green spaces that were much more friendly, encapsulated really in the Sweet Street Revolution that Anne Hidalgo coined in terms of the expansion of the school streets. And so what began as one school street suddenly became 200 in the last 5 years throughout the city, where they've completely pedestrianized the spaces, added in trees, added in rain gardens, but ultimately gave children back the right to be able to arrive and depart from school safely and comfortably, giving parents that comfort to allow their children that freedom again, but also becoming these wonderful community assets where people are spending time on the weekends. At the same time, famously, Paris is now a cycling city. That began with COVID lanes, understanding that essential workers and people that needed to go to service jobs or offices that weren't closed needed a way to get there where public transportation was limited. And it went from quick, cheap sidewalk lanes or pop-up lanes to suddenly what you see here, the Rue de Rivoli, which was 4 lanes of traffic, now just 1 lane for car traffic and very broad bi-directional cycle tracks. And really now giving Paris a whole new identity where cyclists now outnumber cars on their streets. And all of this is at the same time as recognizing that Paris is suffering from a similar situation as many other places with the urban heat island effect, bringing that green back into the city. So not only giving Parisians back wonderful parks to spend time in, but also adding street trees, adding rain gardens and greenery, and really understanding that in order for Paris to be a city of the 21st century, we need to have shade, we need to have rainwater capture, and we need to make it a much greener place than it was just 20 years ago.
Not far from Paris, we have the case in Brussels where there the mobility minister, Elke van der Brand, moved very quickly when she was elected as the regional minister for mobility, implementing what was called the Good Move Plan, which was a series of traffic calming and circulation measures. The biggest part of this was a traffic circulation plan that cut the city of Brussels into 9 districts and made it impossible to drive a car from one district directly to the adjacent district, therefore forcing car traffic to circumnavigate these sensitive commercial residential areas, preventing what was 40% of the traffic on their streets was just through traffic, not destination traffic that wasn't adding to the vibrancy or the safety of those streets. And so in addition to the traffic circulation plan, we have a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit that was introduced, 20 miles per hour on the vast majority of its streets, with a few exceptions on arterials. And then we have the build out of the pedestrian network, which is now the largest on the European continent. 1 street that turned into 2 streets, which turned into 4 streets. This is the Boulevard Anspache, which actually started with some great advocacy work, protest picnics that advocates had in the middle of the street on a Sunday afternoon, that has turned it from 4 lanes of traffic to now what is one of the most successful shopping streets in the Benelux.
Okay, protest picnics, y'all.
It worked. It worked.
Yeah, there you go. And then Barcelona is another one of those like high-profile cities that we were all watching and marveling at what they've been able to do in their neighborhoods, which had these massive spaces that were basically just for parking cars on the Chamfort corners and moving through quickly. And a plan that existed and had been shelved years prior to COVID became this opportunity to reimagine what these environments could look like. So the Superblocks is this wonderful reclamation of space for the Mediterraneans that have the small apartments that get quite warm. They need to get outside, so why not give them these beautiful public spaces, starting out with very tactical urbanism style treatments, a bit of planters and temporary measures. There is one that has been made completely permanent, and it is beautiful, which is this one right here. Cars can still move through, but they are the guest in these spaces. But what I think is so beautiful about this is it's not just giving that public space back, but it is addressing as well the social safety element of how is the lighting there? Is there places for seating? Can women feel comfortable at night? And this was not staged. These women were here having a chat. This was like at 11 o'clock at night, one night. Through this idea of understanding who are the users of our space and how do we make it much more comfortable, which did actually lead to a gender aspect of the urban planning documents that have been codified into how Barcelona now has to plan new urban spaces. And then much like Paris, they were also re-examining how to make arriving and departing from school safer with a school streets program. Again, not completely eliminating through traffic, but definitely slowing it and creating these wonderful spaces for play for children throughout the city.
And then moving off of the European continent, we have the case of Sydney. A good friend of ours, Fiona Campbell, is the bicycle program manager there, an incredible story of persistence, working in a very challenging context, a very car-dominated context. In the 10 years prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, she and her team had managed to build 15 kilometers of protected bike infrastructure. And for every step forward, it felt to them like they were taking 2 steps back. But in that first year after the pandemic hit, they built 150 kilometers. And again, this really provided this low risk, high reward opportunity to reallocate space to provide an alternative to the public transport system, knowing that people would be reticent to use the trams, buses, and trains. And they really embraced the bicycle as an alternative, and increasingly, of course, the electric bicycle, with the proportion of women riding increasing significantly and using this as a link in their mobility of care, dropping kids off at school, getting to grocery stores, and then likely going to a public transport hub to arrive at their final destination.
So those were some pretty high profile ones that were constantly coming into our social media feed. But in that time, Chris and I started to expand our respective work. Chris with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, myself working as a consultant for various firms, and now for myself. Seeing what's happening outside of the more Western, North American, Eurocentric environment. For me, that was the opportunity to work with Women Mobilize Women, which is an initiative funded by the German Development Bank. There's all sorts of acronyms going in through my brain that will mean nothing to you, so that's the simplest way of describing it. But with that, this is an organization focused on funding initiatives and building the opportunities for women in transport, particularly in emerging economies with a strong focus in the global south. And through that opportunity, getting to meet wonderful people like Kalpana Viswanath, you'll hear her story in a minute, who kind of shined a light on why it's important to also tell the stories of what's happening outside of at least my more Eurocentric bubble to help inspire more places.
And that really has been the great privilege of our trajectory from advocacy into consultancy and diplomacy. Is we're no longer sitting around talking about making change happen and advocating for it. We actually have the privilege of being in the room with these decision makers and elected officials. That's Valerie Plante, the mayor of Montreal, who I was lucky enough to give a tour of Amsterdam to. Through my work with the DCE, we've also worked with Mayor Hidalgo's office in Paris. And this global mandate that has been funded by the Dutch government takes me now to every corner of the world. So we're able to share these, as Melissa said, less likely stories of urban transformation and not just in the usual places.
So now we're going to share some of those lesser known stories with you of what's happening around the world.
Yeah, and that begins in Delhi, a city that Melissa and I both separately had the opportunity to travel to. And for anybody who's had the opportunity to visit, it is a very obviously male-dominated city. When you visit the public spaces, when you ride the public transport, women really struggle with feeling safe, with feeling comfortable, with feeling included in the public realm. And that's really the problem that this entrepreneur, Kalpana Viswanath, wanted to take on, because from what she was hearing from her peers and colleagues is that women, based on their fear and discomfort on the streets of Delhi, this was affecting where they would choose to live and work and go to school, and nobody should be limited by that kind of fear of their city to access opportunity and get on with their lives. So she initiated a mobile application called Safety Pin. It's basically a crowd-funded, crowd-sourced map where you can report incidents and feelings of discomfort and unsafety. And this app collected tens and tens of thousands of incidents and places where women were reporting they felt unsafe. And then they were able to give this data to the local government so they could address this in a systemic way and add lighting and better access and viewing sightlines and so on and so forth. It's going to take decades to address this problem from a structural and cultural perspective, but an instance of an entrepreneur that put her money where her mouth is to address a greater societal problem in a very challenging context. And the fantastic thing is, of course, that the Safety Pin app has now been used in cities all across, not just India, but is now reaching the shores of Latin America as well.
So moving to Latin America, Bogota is not really a city that I would say is a lesser known story of change. A lot of people do know what has been happening there, but it sort of kept pushing and pushing during the COVID times to become, to really expand on basically on its cycling history. And that has included the expansion of cycle lanes, for example, on the Septima here, with this idea of how can we make sure that Bogotanos have a way to access employment, education, healthcare services, in complement with a really robust bike share that actually launched in mid-2022, and in its first 6 months exceeded all expectations. But what I found so special about the story in Bogota is that these cycle lanes extend not just from the more affluent communities, but into the informal communities, understanding that these are where our service workers are working, the people working more lower income jobs who can't afford to spend 2.5, 3 hours on public transportation to reach their jobs. So how can we support them with cycling infrastructure in complement with their really prominent bus rapid transit to make sure that caregivers can reach work, pick up kids, all of the in-between. And at the same time, that investment comes along with development of care blocks, which are essentially community centers set up near transit hubs to provide essential services for carers who would normally not enter the workforce because they have to be there for family members, whether they're caring for parents or children, or they left education before they graduated, so they had limited access to jobs. And so these care blocks not only provide a community for them, but provide training, and at the same time childcare services, laundry services for these women, so that they're removing many of the barriers for their limitations previously, and having a really wonderful impact for these women in terms of being able to finally reach the potential that they hoped they could have.
Manila is a story that we stumbled across in our day jobs. Again, it was a project that the Dutch Cycling Embassy was tangentially involved in, but it was really an incredible example of what effective advocacy can accomplish. A young woman by the name of Kaisha Mayuga, as the story goes, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Philippine government shut down all public transport altogether, was hearing stories of essential workers, hospital workers sleeping at their jobs because they had no way to get back to their homes in a time-effective manner. So this sparked an idea. A Sunday morning, she got together some friends and some traffic cones and managed to convince the local government to experiment with a couple of kilometers of pop-up temporary cycling infrastructure. It was embraced by Manilans of all ages. And it became the blueprint for a broader COVID-19 response, a cycling network of 500 kilometers of permanent infrastructure that the Dutch Cycling Embassy consulted on. And Manila, in a very short period of time, has gone from zero cycling infrastructure now to hundreds of kilometers, all through this work of this visionary and very, committed
And stubborn.
Stubborn. Stubborn's the wrong word.
She is stubborn, though.
Okay. Okay.
Persistent.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's really quite incredible what she and of course her team has managed to accomplish in that context.
Heading back over to Europe, the city of Tirana is maybe one that you might have heard about, might not have, but overall it's a relatively young city.
Which country?
In Albania. Yep.
In the Balkans and
Yeah.
southeastern Europe.
Yeah, so it's a former, and it's okay. I didn't know where it was either until I met the woman that was running the things there. Yeah, it's a former communist city, and in the early 90s or so, had a rapid transformation because there was no policies in place, no formal planning. The city kind of expanded rapidly, buildings popping up everywhere, everyone suddenly falling into this trap of feeling that they needed to have a car in a city that, you remember the numbers better than I do, started out with how many?
It was like something like they went from 500 cars to 300,000 cars in just a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the environment essentially became very congested, very chaotic, and what happened a few years back was there was a change in government, and the mayor that came in started with this child first policy. And his mobility manager, Anwar Ristani, took that on to first look at how do we create public spaces for children? How do we bring play back to these kids for which Tirana is their home? And part of that was also looking at the schools and developing their own school street program together with global NGOs that could fund it. The way she describes it to us is she was picking up her kids from school. She saw all these wonderful students leaving, bursting with energy of everything they had learned today, which, to be fair, having teenagers, when we met her, I'm like, they do that? Anyway, but what she said is they're walking out to this sea of cars. And for her, that felt like, that's just not fair to kids. And so by reclaiming space, removing what were former traffic sewers and widening the footpath, was giving kids back this ability to arrive and depart from school safely. And with that, also building out playgrounds rapidly throughout the city. This photo is from the Grand Park, which is sort of like their central park, where everyone comes to congregate and spend time. But there were nowhere for kids to play. And so they went forward with this big project to create a playground that is not just for young people, but for all ages from 0 to 18. To give them that social space to be outdoors, to allow them the feeling that I belong in this city. And at the same time as you have these big projects, you have the reclamation of pocket spaces that were underused, making sure that children had access in their own neighborhoods to spaces for play. And like many cities, Tirana is also expanding its cycling program and trying to reclaim some of these broad boulevards that have been developed to create comfortable, separated cycling facilities that will hopefully encourage the next generation of cyclists in this relatively young but historic city.
Yeah, and as we keep saying, we were looking for lesser known stories of change, and Kampala, Uganda, certainly maybe not on a lot of our radars when it comes to urbanism and transportation. A woman that we were lucky enough to meet at the Velo City Conference, Amanda Nagabino, who is an urban planner there. She completed her master's degree 15 years ago in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands, obviously embraced the cycling lifestyle that the Dutch have to offer, and actually wrote her thesis project on how to turn, or at least introduce, cycling infrastructure and culture to Kampala. She lobbied the local government for a decade unsuccessfully, but as with everywhere and many of these examples, COVID-19 provided the opportunity to try out some pilot projects, which ultimately turned to the introduction of 2 non-motorized corridors in the city center of Kampala. A long way from becoming a cycling city, but it is a start. And even funding herself, Amanda, a bike sharing program out of her own pocket, at least to connect the local university. And a lot of the young women that take her class now have access to the city in between the cycling infrastructure and the bike sharing project.
And then the last example is not an infrastructure or like a physically designed intervention, but rather the introduction of a network for people, for women. And that exists across Latin America thanks to several very prominent leaders in either national, provincial, or local politics that saw that this leaky pipeline that Chris was talking about. You have all these women coming up through various universities and then not feeling safe and leaving the industry. And they wanted to make sure that they were creating a space where they could provide that mentorship and that leadership and that safe space for women working in transport in Latin America. And that resulted in the creation of the Mujeres en Movimiento, which is a Latin American network specifically focused on that. So creating this mentorship opportunities for capacity building, for networking, finding out what other women are working in that space, to keep them in the sector so that they can help design the future of Latin American cities. And that's helping to transform, this is in Mexico City, transform them into more cycling friendly. They're there to talk about things like how bike share helps keep them connected, how that integration with public transportation is integral, really to make sure that all women have not only access through public transportation or for sustainable mobility, but access in the work field as well. And for us, it's this really inspirational story of how it's not just about what we build on the ground, but what we build in our systems as well.
Okay, so sorry, that was rapid fire. That was very intensive and quick. But of course, you know this. The underlying answer to this question: what do all these stories have in common? Women are getting shit done. Are we allowed to say that? We sometimes actually have it on the slide, but I don't think.
No, I think it's just better if we say it.
Okay, all right. And this became the thesis of the book. This is why we spent 2 years of our lives traveling to all of these places and speaking to all of these women, was because our thesis was that this was disproportionately happening in cities that were led by women, and we wanted to investigate why that is. What is it about women in leadership that is breaking through the status quo and getting stuff done? And so we were lucky enough to sit down with each of those 19 women in those 11 global cities. And by the end of that process, by asking them a series of questions and learning more about what they bring to their job in a daily basis, we were able to identify 5 leadership qualities that we're going to leave you with today, with the emphasis that these are not inherently female leadership qualities. There are plenty of men in the world that display these leadership qualities, but ultimately this is about identifying leaders who perhaps already have these leadership qualities or encouraging them to adapt them, because this is, I think, really the key to making change happen in our cities and not letting the inertia take over. So with that, we'll start with empathy, which, as we often say, feels like a radical act in 2026. The idea of thinking outside of our own lived experience towards other users of the city. I think the idea speaks for itself, but the point we like to emphasize is this is paradoxically a selfish act, because if you're only designing and thinking about your own lived experience, you are eventually designing yourself out of the system. Because we're all on a spectrum, from young to old, from rich to poor, from able to disabled. And the more that we can do to design for all of those stages of life, as Barcelona has done, the more that we will ultimately benefit at the end of the day as our life changes. So in Barcelona, you've seen the development of the superblocks, and then what has been a soft form of protest in the bike bus movement, perhaps one of the biggest in the world. We were lucky enough to ride one morning with 100 children, all riding to school in the morning, to give themselves a voice, to give themselves a visibility in the city, to say, yeah, you're building some infrastructure, but it's not good enough and it's not quick enough for us to get to school. We may not get a vote, but we should count in this process. Barcelona is still a work in progress, of course, and a lot of these projects have been put in a bit of a political stasis at the moment as the political winds have changed, but the advocacy community there, and I think the groundwork that they've started hopefully will lead to good things in the future.
So thinking about that in terms of these foundations that are being planted now, the other thing that we saw frequently in all of the 19 women that we got to speak to, was this idea of a long-term vision. They're not thinking about, okay, if I do this now, this is the impact of 1 year from now that we will aim for, but rather how can I do this one thing or these several things now so that 10, 15, 20 years from now, they'll see the fruits of those labors. And one of the best examples of that is here in, I've forgotten the name of it.
Schalkenberg Square?
I think that's it, yeah. In Tirana, which was a massive traffic roundabout that, with the vision of what it could be, completely transformed this space into what is now, the living room of the city, where this was like I think a Wednesday or a Thursday evening. I have to point out this little boy. He's adorable and just like walking around with his drum the whole time. We showed this video when we were in Vancouver at a conference, and a gentleman that we know said, I saw that boy when I was there too. But it's just this idea of like, how do we give this public space back in a city that is still trying to figure out what they look like in this like new era of time. And this square, like I said, huge roundabout, now open space, connecting the historic mosque with the National Library, with the Opera House. And it's just a wonderful space to spend time in, with this idea of like this long-term benefit to what could have been very short-term pain, I'm sure.
So the third leadership quality we emphasize is this idea of valuing the work of care, that so much of what we do as urban transport planners is focused on the breadwinner of the household, the economically driven trip, and we often forget that none of that economic activity occurs without the invisible underlying care work that is done by often disproportionately the woman of the household. So
he pointed at me, we do have a fairly even balance at home, just so you know. You did this, you called that one this time.
But it is, and we found these statistics in the second book. It's, I think in the United States, the woman is doing 2 hours a day more of care work than the man on average. And of course, there are plenty of men that are stepping up and doing the care work now, but at the end of the day, again, it's about designing for all stages of life, for all users of the city, so that they can not just get from the house to the office as efficiently as possible, but can get to the corner store, to school, to public transport, to community centers, and everywhere from in between, from A to B to C to D to E, and so on and so forth. Cycling's not the end goal, but it is one of the tools that we can use. And then this was a really cool example of that in Tirana, of course, a very young city, building their cycling infrastructure out, but they wanted to give a place where children could learn how to cycle and learn the rules of the road in a low-risk environment. So this is a traffic garden that they built in that same Central Park. They train thousands and thousands of children each and every year, training, as Melissa said, the next generation of cyclists, in equal number, girls and boys, of course. I think pointing out that it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the societal conditions, the cultural behavioral change needed for the users of that infrastructure. Ignore me, I'm about to go the wrong way through. Right there, okay. Yeah. At some point, I got stuck in a loop, and
That's called a traffic garden?
Yes.
How big was that? Do you have any feel for it in terms of acres or square feet?
very small. I mean, yeah, quite compact. I wouldn't even know acres. Yeah, a couple of hectares. That doesn't help. But also, maybe important to plug, there is a traffic garden movement and organization here in the United States that is providing resources, design guidelines, and funding to take over old basketball courts, tennis courts, any of these underutilized spaces for, I mean, this is kind of a gold-plated, really quite high-level example, but it can be done virtually everywhere, anywhere you have some underutilized asphalt.
So second to last is this idea of building alliances. And I know we all, regardless of where we are in the world, live in a very polarized environment right now, so it's really hard to think about how can we build those alliances. But this was the key thing that we kept finding in a lot of these success stories is the women that we interviewed had the tenacity to reach across the aisle to find unlikely partners to help realize a lot of these projects. And the best example of that is actually in Montreal with the open streets. Chris talked about how the city worked with the businesses to make this happen. It it was actually a business initiative during COVID. So all of these businesses on Rue Montréal and a number of others, the 11 others in the city, said, we're struggling. We need people to come and spend money, but we don't know how to get them to come. And working with the city, they were able to create these public spaces that are now an asset in the summer months for these communities. So it's this unlikely partnership. We often, in this space are trying to convince business owners that they're going to benefit when we build out for walking and cycling. They have a hard time believing those 2 parking spaces are not the lifeblood of their business. But this is just simply by throwing up some planters for 6 months of the year, for now 7 years in a row, these businesses all thrive all throughout the year. What I would love is if it became all year round. I think Montreal is a beautiful winter city as well, but...
Why did they take it down in winter?
Snow storage. It's also the reason that their bike share it's only just in the last few years become seasonless, so all year. So they need the parking spaces to store the snow, although there's now less and less snow.
But also, Montreal's the same latitude as Moscow, so it does get really cold, heavy winters.
Yeah, so
they're still working on their winter city strategy, including the cycling infrastructure, which hasn't historically been maintained in the winter months, but that is slowly changing. As the culture changes and as the usage changes, they can dedicate more resources to some of these initiatives.
Yeah, it is one thing that we're seeing more in more northern cities is they are, like Chris said, creating these winter city strategies that are not only how to maintain the cycling infrastructure, but also create public spaces where people can spend time that have heating elements or various other activations.
Have these little shuttles for people that can ride hail, basically, if they aren't physically able to walk longer distances. They have these free shuttles, rickshaws, that people can use to get up and down the corridor as well. So they're very well designed and thought out and in engaging with the community to make sure it's as accessible to as many people as possible.
All right.
And then fifth, and certainly not least, we have this idea of prioritizing impact over power. Anne Hidalgo, who somebody at one of our presentations referred to as our Lord and Savior, Anne Hidalgo. I think is a real force of nature. When we sat down with her, which we had the privilege of doing for an hour, she didn't once talk about her personal successes, the bike lanes or the school streets that she built. She was only interested in talking about lifting up the people, and specifically the women around her who'd been subject to vicious attacks in the media, to protect them, to support them, and to give her team the credit that they deserve. And I think there's a lot to be said about this approach where a lot of the women that we talked about today, they were unafraid to make the seemingly unpopular decisions. They leaned into the controversy. They knew they were elected to do a job. And guess what? It actually ended up winning them votes. And in the case of Anne Hidalgo, in the case of Valérie Plante in Montreal, what we also saw is after 2 or 3 terms, they were willing to step down and say, no, I've given all that I can give. I'm going to make space for the next generation of leaders to give them the ideas, new space for new ideas and energy, to not just cling on to power for power's sake for as long as possible, as we're seeing with, certain leaders in the world who I won't mention. So as Melissa said, Paris has really transformed into a cycling city. I think it's gone from a 3% mode share now to 15 or 16%. And in certain intersections like this one, the Rue de Rivoli is almost 20,000 cyclists a day. So it's rivaling that of Amsterdam in a very short period of time. And you can see how temporary the road markings are. This is nothing that's gold-plated and beautiful. They've literally scrubbed out the existing road markings, reallocated the space, but their task now in the years ahead will be going from pop-up to permanent and making a lot of these temporary interventions a more beautiful and permanent part of the streetscape in Paris. And then we'll leave you with one clip, because this is one of the highlights of our entire journey, spending a Sunday afternoon cycling through the car-free streets of Mexico City. Every single Sunday, they open up 74 kilometers, so 50 miles of streets on their arterials. 100,000 people come out on foot, on bike, and it was such a joyous, emotional experience just for a few hours on a Sunday. But I think for all the pushback that we get that this can't happen in North America, Montreal and Mexico City in particular show that it is happening in North America. We just need a bit more of imagination and a bit more leadership and courage to bring that forward. And well, let's just enjoy the video. I find it so, so nice to watch. And this is, of course, these are arterials that are moving 6-8 lanes of traffic on the rest of the week. So it's quite special that they do this 4 times a month.
I'm going to click to the next one.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you all for coming out and for listening to us. I mean, like Chris said when we talked about the lessons learned, we really want to emphasize that while the book is Women Changing Cities, and for us it was very important to lift up the work that women are doing around the world, and by no means is this the full encapsulation of the amazing women that are doing these kinds of things in countries all over the world, but that these are leadership qualities that we need to be celebrating regardless of which gender bears them, because these are the people that are changing our cities, and we know countless men throughout the world that are also having this positive impact. And the more that we can elevate this idea of valuing empathy, of valuing the foundational work of care that's happening, about building those alliances and that impact over power, the more that we can see great successes in our cities. So with that, I won't forget to plug it this time.
Please. Yeah.
As I do forget, I even forget to tell people that I've written books sometimes. So this QR is to order the book. Unfortunately, like Chris said, we weren't able to get them over. I think our books are...
They're in the middle of the Atlantic
Yes.
Ocean right now. So they will be here hopefully in the next 2 weeks.
But yeah, if you'd like to pre-order a copy, that would be amazing. We do know when we were over at the event yesterday with the city of Austin that there is, at least at that library, a copy coming. I don't know which library branch that is, so I apologize. But or just share, if you have a copy, share it around and share these ideas of what happened and where it can go from there. Yes?
Melissa, there's someone in the room who has a book, and you need to see the book. It is pretty impressive.
Hey!
Yeah. Oh, we've got two!
So
Open it and show the pictures.
It is a full color book.
Quasi-coffee table book?
Yeah, there's, I think, 160 full color photos. We thought it was going to be easier, but...
Less words, more photos, but
Yeah.
it's the same amount of work.
But no, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you again for this invitation.
This is wonderful.
Of course.
I wanted to be sure that we acknowledge someone else in the room. We have so many great women changing cities in this room, but Councilmember Paige Ellis from
Woo!
Which is great to see. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Paige Ellis. I know a lot of y'all. I hope to get to know every single one of you, but I've been fortunate to get to chair the Mobility Committee for 6 years now, and Chief of Staff just reminded me of that this week. And I get to serve on the board of Pat Metro as well, and so it's great to get to meet some people I follow on social media in real life and get to hear their own words about how this works. When I had first seen that this book was available, I texted it to Veronica Castro de Vereda, and I was like, this is exactly what you were saying on that panel a couple of years ago about designing cities that are for everybody, all types of families, all types of needs. I fell into bicycle advocacy because someone took me to the Netherlands, and I just changed my perspective on how cities could function. And since then, I've just been listening to as many of y'all as I can, put these little ideas in my ear, and then we say, okay, let's go write a policy, let's go make it happen. So, love to be in the room, love getting to hear Chris and Melissa speak about their work, and I'm going to order the book now that I got the QR code.
Any other questions?
We also mentioned Hayden herself.
Yeah.
Yes or no question?
Nate Baudet is in the room.
I have a yes or no question for you. if you're someone in this room who wants to make this type of impact locally, should they go to safestreetsaustin.org and donate?
I mean, that feels like a rhetorical question. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer, or if anyone has any questions for people in the room.
Yeah, just another commonality I saw in all these places and all the amazing work that the women are doing. As you mentioned several times, it arose in the era of COVID. And it's just really frustrating to me that we have to wait till a global pandemic before we start introducing really important and very good ideas about what our cities should be. And I guess I was just wondering if y'all had any other reflections on that. Like, why do we have to wait for that?
Yeah. Well, the other thing, that I think we identified in this process and speaking to the women was, generally speaking, elected officials, God bless them, are very bad at actually gauging public opinion and knowing what is popular and what is unpopular. And so they tend to often listen to their direct circle of influence, and that means that it's a recipe for the status quo. It means that nothing changes, because for a lot of those people, the status quo works. And I think one thing that women arguably do better than men is to get out of their sphere of influence and actually go into the community and find out what the community wants. And I think we would argue that a lot of these things that we've shown are what people quietly want. They're just not lobbying their elected officials or taking to the streets or organizing themselves, the adage being that opposition always drowns out permission. And COVID-19 changed that calculus very quickly and provided people the cover to ignore the opposition because we're just going to do what's right. Arguably for many other things, including the rollout of the vaccines, which a certain percentage of the population was vehemently against, but we said, no, this is the right thing to do. This is what science tells us we need to do, and so we're going to do it. And so I don't know if I've answered your question. But
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
Dovetailing on that, I think the idea is that we know that there's some in this room, there are elected officials that understand this, and the more that we can support them as a community, because whether, I don't know what your experiences are like, but I know other counselors that we've spoken to, they're in a council and they're the only person, they're the only sane voice in the room. And it can feel really frustrating, and the more that we can support them in their work or help to convince their fellow counselors that this is the right thing to do, we can start to see that shift. And we do see it in some cities where you start to have that groundswell of, one counselor says, we need to do this, we need to build a bike lane, or we need to build a good public space. And then others are like, I don't know. And then you prod their local constituencies, like, you should talk to them. And then suddenly like, oh, well, this business owner says it'll be great, so yeah, let's do it. And then suddenly you see this ripple effect. But it's on us, unfortunately.
Very quickly, I will add, almost every single one of these examples we write about in the book, and we didn't mention it in the presentation, all of these women were subject to vicious abuse, personal attacks, in some cases threats to their life and their families. And 2 or 3 examples, they had to go into police security escort or supervision. This unfortunately feels like an inevitable part of the process as well. And I think until we figure out a way to address that, people aren't going to put their families or their lives on the line. The moment we start talking about disadvantaging cars, people get really irrational, really emotional and react in a very defensive way. To the point where, I mean, why would you reallocate space on your street if it's going to subject you to those kinds of threats and attacks? And I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately. But until we change that calculus, I don't think we're going to see the change that we need to.
Yeah. Bright note, Chris.
Hey.
Bright note.
Sorry.
Chris is feeling a little bit tired and therefore a little like, oh. So, yeah. But I think yeah, it's the bright spots. And that's the thing is, so I've had several people ask me since we arrived, like, what does it feel like to be in the US right now? And I'll leave a lot of very personal thoughts out of it, but I think the one thing that I said was, like, I keep meeting so many positive people, so many people that are working to try to change things, whether that's advocacy or decision makers or planners. And so there's so much energy here that it's been nice to be around that and to be reminded that there are awesome people that are making things happen. And yeah, it's a long slog, and no matter where I present, I'm talking about how behavior change might take a generation, and so many of us in this room are not going to get to enjoy what we're working on, but it's the long-term vision, right? It's what we're working towards, so yeah. So keep it up.
Super quick one. So we just lost a council member, Chris Riley. He always pushed to reduce our lane sizes. Austin Fire requires 12.5 feet. Most of our peer cities allow for 10. So cars feel comfortable driving faster, which kills a lot of pedestrians and cyclists. Have you seen anybody go against any kind of fire department successfully where they're pretending it's public safety, but actually it's just making the roads more dangerous?
Yeah, we get this seems to be a very specifically North American challenge, and I know I just read a paper by the Pedestrian and Bicycle.
The Center for Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety?
Yes, exactly. On this exact topic, and they actually cited the work of the Dutch Cycling Embassy because we've done some engagement with the emergency services in the Netherlands and trying to do kind of a peer exchange with emergency services in the United States. It is very difficult when your police and fire and ambulance services have basically a veto power on any changes to the streets. But one thing we heard again and again, and that was what Lauren Deerenfield told me when I spoke to her, was if you can help them understand that we're actually all on the same side of saving lives, we're ultimately we're all here to keep the streets safe and not go at this in a polarizing or attacking way, but try to find some common ground, as we say, to build those alliances and help them understand we're all working towards the same goal. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think part of the problem is that a lot of these, let's face it, they're men in positions, are viewing the world through a windshield, and they just see proposed change and react to it with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And we need to address that in an empathetic and a positive manner rather than see them as an opponent.
There is an example, I don't remember what city it was, I think it was in the Midwest, but MobiCon did that work with that city, and they built up a test site where they actually had the emergency services come, including fire, to show them if they were to build the roundabout that they would like to propose, that they could still navigate it quite comfortably. I can look it up and find it. But that was specifically because they were getting so much pushback saying, no, you can't do that. We can't narrow our streets. We can't put in this roundabout because we'll never get around it. And they actually built a physical test site in a large parking lot to get them to try it out.
To be fair, this also happens in the Netherlands. You know, we do see some emergency services able to block or water down proposals. I think the key thing that they do is involve them much earlier in the process so that they feel they have a stake, rather than saying, surprise, this is what we've come up with. This is something that we can co-design and work on together. But it's not easy, yeah.
Yeah.
The fire department really fought parking on both sides in Mueller.
Right.
It really restricts the width, and we had to do this. And for one thing, we have a really constant grid pattern that they have more than one way to get to a fire. But we had to the fire department really fought the narrow streets here and parking on both sides, the neighborhood streets.
Yeah.
Their response time is the highest in the whole city for Mueller, yet they complain about it the most because it's the hardest to navigate, yet their number one statistic, which is their response time, is the best in the whole city.
Yeah.
System, and because of the master planning that includes a fire station that serves this area in a very close proximity,
Right.
which is part of the investments, the bigger picture vision.
Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts you want to share, questions for yourselves?
I'm Emily. I came up from San Antonio. I ran the only bike rest in San Antonio, and we're in our second year. And I just want to thank you for writing this. I feel like you showed how successful it was, and I feel like it's also a really positive way to engage in advocacy that keeps me feeling more like than,
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, I think, a lot of the times when we're talking to cities, I'm like, well, where do we start? We've got nothing. What can we do? And that's often what we'll say is like, do you have an active school travel program, or would you like to? In very few places will people say no to making things better for kids, and that's often it's sort of like the place to start it. It becomes the example of like, look, we did this here. Now maybe we can do this on other neighborhood streets, and you might not change all the arterials, but we might get to a point where we're giving kids back that right to play in the streets that I know I had. I don't know how I see the demographic is skewing all over the place here. Maybe some of you younger folks didn't get to enjoy that in the same way, but we talk about getting kids outdoors more. They don't spend enough time outside, but we don't give them that space. And so if we can do that, that's a good place to start.
I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of these cities we highlight have led with children, and even a few that we considered and didn't end up featuring. I'm thinking of Linda Buchanan in the city of North Vancouver. They had a very successful child-friendly city policy. So, as you say, in today's political climate, I think leading with children is also a strategically smart move, not just the right move, because very few people can object, as Melissa said, to bike buses, school streets, playgrounds, and these can become the lattice work, the framework that you can build up from to build adult-friendly infrastructure as well as child-friendly.
Yeah?
I liked your comment about pointing out that most people will be at a different stage of life eventually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and also the idea, even elected officials who are men usually have some family members, and any of them who are married with kids should empathize with the idea, hey, your wife is a chauffeur a lot of the time, very frequently, right? And even if it's only enlightened self-interest, what about the idea that, is it really helpful to your family that your wife has to spend this many hours just driving kids back and forth? I have teenagers, so I speak from experience. And I was biking a lot before I had kids, and then I decided it was way too scary to get them on a bike for most things.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's helpful to approach it again with the kids and look at the other angle of, your wife might have more time to do X, Y, Z with you, for you, whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
if she didn't have to spend all that time driving the kids.
But it's not. Yeah, that's certainly true. But then it also impacts you personally as well. And we were told this great anecdote. We were in Shanghai in China before Christmas and doing some workshops with the local government there. And they told this story of a local official, the Minister for Transport for the city of Shanghai, who spent 30 or 40 years, getting chaperoned around by a driver, had this windshield worldview, spent 40 years making the city car friendly. And then on the day he retired, he stepped out of his apartment building and he wondered why his neighborhood wasn't walkable anymore, So it's like ultimately, the chickens come home to roost. And
Positive note on the leading with kids. So I don't know if anyone in this room knows. If you do know, that's great. But if not, I'm announcing it here that the mayor currently has launched an initiative called Gen ATX, which is leading with kids and making Austin the best place in America to be a kid. And I think there's a huge opportunity. It's a partnership with the United Way, and it's a huge opportunity. I'm working on it from a consulting standpoint. It's a huge opportunity to look at many aspects of what it means to grow up in a healthy, happy, and safe in Austin. But I believe there's going to be a lot of built environment policy recommendations that are going to come out of that will help the movement overall.
Mm-hmm.
So
cool. Yeah.
pay attention, look for it on your news outlets, and get involved.
I just want to plug on the other end of that age spectrum as well, because I feel like kids is like the obvious place where we can all start, because a lot of us have that commonality, whether we have kids or are young ourselves or whatever. But the quote that that anecdote that Chris mentioned in terms of designing ourselves out came from conversations with people that were advocating for older adults. Like, we are spending all of this time investing in having a home where we like building this beautiful community, and then what we see for a lot of adults once they reach like 70, 75, their worldview starts to shrink, their social circle shrinks, and their ability to access that social circle also shrinks. And the example from your grandfather is like the pinnacle of that. He lived in the Midlands in the UK, he worked for a car manufacturer, he drove everywhere, and then suddenly when he couldn't have his driver's license anymore, he couldn't move out of his community, he was stuck. And so this life he built for himself was no longer available to him. And so I think that in addition to starting with kids and working with that, also reminding these people that are spending all of this time and money to build their beautiful communities, whether it's gated or otherwise, for themselves, one day they won't be able to leave that community unless they actually take into account, how am I going to move when I can't drive anymore because it's not safe? When I have a disability, that means I have to move around with a walker or something. We want to make sure we can still enjoy our spaces that we're building, even as we get old ourselves. Yeah.
I know we're getting short on time, so I wanted to thank you guys so very, very much for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you.
I noticed before we started that we have a bike overflow on it. You were right. And I wanted to introduce Robert. Robert is the person who organized the bike ride. For those of you who want to join on a bike ride with Chris and Melissa and Robert, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, it'll be 4 to 6 miles depending on how we're feeling, about the 4 mile part. It'll be very gentle. We're just going to go tour some of the all ages and abilities, which that's kind of in quotation marks at a few places around this part of East Austin. And we'll have about 10 stops. It's very leisurely paced, so everyone's invited to join with us. And we'll end up back here in Mueller, so if this is where you're parked, or you'll end up back here. And anyone have any questions? It's a few hills, but nothing major, just going up Manor, essentially.
We're taking over the street.
No, we'll be mostly in the byways, unless we're in the greenways. Yeah.
You're gonna go an hour?
Yeah, about an hour, yeah. We'll be good. And there'll be a few points if you need to cut out early where you'll be within a mile of here, so.
And you'll get to see a little bit more of this neighborhood that we've been talking about with the grid, and hopefully it's more accessible. David and I moved here about a year and a half ago for that very reason, so that when we get 20 years from now, we can still move around our neighborhood.
One last thing I just wanted to say, if you'd like us to sign your books, we will. I'm just going to tell you that now. For those that have pre-ordered, I'm thinking we need to do like a sticker or something that we can mail off.
Or even the postcards. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
If
you happen to buy a book, maybe we can facilitate sending something this way. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Yeah. We did that in Miami, so yeah, awesome. Okay.
Wow. That's a lot of information and a lot of women that are changing the world and making it a better place for all of us. Until the next time, with the Tower Coffee Hour, you take care, and we'll see you down the road.